This session concerns itself with the strategic part of Tomorrow Movement's DNA and aims to share an understanding and appreciation of the role of groups working in all parts of social movement ecology, and to share the hybrid model, a model of organizing that functions across social movement ecology. And when we talk about social movement ecology, we borrow from momentum organizing theory, who say that social movement ecology is a framework for understanding the many different approaches to social change and how they interact. And the momentum social movement ecology can be broken up into three parts. There are social movements that focus on personal transformation. There are social movements that focus on building viable alternatives, and there are social movements that focus on changing dominant institutions. And if we look at movements that focus on personal transformation, they are centered around the transformation of individuals with the belief that larger social change will follow. Some examples you can see there on the slide are Headspace and Alcoholics Anonymous. In terms of movements that focus on building alternatives, these movements create new alternative institutions that model the world as it should be, with the belief that if you create a viable enough new institution, people will join. The things that come to mind for me in this space are groups focused on mutual aid, creating an institution of the provision of services, be it food, housing, community support, that exist outside the dominant institutions of our time. So some examples here on the slide are the Community Union Defence League, which has branches across so-called Australia, and also the Mutual Aid Community Kitchen down in Nipalana, Hobart. Another example is Future Super, which has created an alternative financial institution free from the influence of fossil fuel companies. The last section of the social movement ecology, as per the momentum framework, is movements that focus on changing dominant institutions. And these movements identify the institutions that make the biggest impact on our lives and build and leverage power to influence them. And this is the type of movements that you might find in the trade union movement, which have identified, capitalist institutions, businesses, as having a really big impact on workers' lives and collectivize worker power to influence those businesses. Some other examples are the Tasmanian Palestine Advocacy Network, TPAN, Grant, Grassroots Action Network Tasmania, and also, of course, Tomorrow Movement, which has identified the Australian federal government as the institution that has a really large impact on young people's lives and has spent the last few years building power in an attempt to influence it. Because changing dominant institutions is what Tomorrow Movement focuses on, we're going to zoom in on that. Tomorrow Movement is here to change dominant institutions to win good jobs, great public services, and a safe climate for all. Just a disclaimer before I go any further, I'm about to break down a couple of things into categories. This is so we can build an understanding of organizing together, but in reality the world that we live in is a lot more complex and messy and can't be categorized. So keep in mind that the categories that we're about to go into are not binary and are not reflected perfectly in the world. With that being said, there are two strong traditions of movements working to change dominant institutions. And these traditions can be called structure-based organizing and mass protest. If we first look at structure-based organizing, a perfect example is the wonderful work that the trade union movement has done over many hundreds of years, which aim to build a base of power of members who can leverage their power over a decision maker to win reforms. Structure-based organizers often organize with people directly affected. If we go back to the union example, union delegates or union organizers will organize workers on the shop floor, people directly impacted by the decision makers they're trying to influence, and fight for incremental victories to make concrete changes, and are often also focused on long-term power building. We can see that in the longevity of, for example, in Australia, the trade union movement. Some key features of the structured organizing tradition is that they organize directly affected community and win concrete instrumental reforms. And structured organizations win by mobilizing and organizing within structures, be they workplaces, campuses, or congregations, to put pressure on a decision maker. And they build power over the long term, right? They're long-term organizations. They use deep leadership development and relationship building with directly affected people to build power. If we pivot to another strong organising tradition, we can think about the tradition of mass protest. And mass protest uses mediagenic actions that tell clear stories and mass mobilizations to move public opinion and to shift what is seen as politically possible. And a really good recent example of that is the Black Lives Matter movement, or also the more recent Palestinian solidarity movements that have emerged across the world in the wake of October 7, 2023. Mass protest tradition aims to win shifts in public opinion and drastically change what's politically possible. Mass protest involves whoever is moved to show up and be part of the cause, and is focused on mobilizing masses of people to show power. Some key features of mass protest is that mass protest movements organize whoever. They don't have to be impacted by the issue at hand. Mass protest movements, when they do well, win shifts in public opinion and can quite quickly change what is politically possible through taking large or small scale actions that target dominant institutions and capture the media spotlight. And mass protest movements build power through mobilizing large numbers of people to act, vote, and agree with the movement. So as you can see here, both of these traditions are really valuable and have really necessary parts for long-term social change. And the concept that I want to introduce now is the momentum model of organizing, which can cherry pick the best bits of both of these long-standing protest traditions and develop a hybrid between them. And this is strategic because structured organizing and mass protest complement each other, right? Where one is weak, the other is strong. And by utilizing both, we can build movements that are able to draw on all the strengths from these traditions. I want to name here that, as I said before, binaries are not real. Movements are a spectrum, and we want to really deepen our knowledge around how that shows up already and how we can experiment to get these two traditions more in sync with each other. And I also want to name really explicitly that this idea isn't new. Lots of groups have been doing this for decades and decades, particularly Black and people of color-led organizations around the world. But because of racism and the not-for-profit industrial complex that has focused on so-called structure in the Western world, many stories and lessons from these movements haven't been passed down and studied as they should be. One example that I do want to shout out is a movement called Otpor, and this is a movement that the momentum model is heavily based on. And I highly recommend the film Bringing Down a Dictator by Steve York. You all, if you want to dive deeper into the history of Otpor and the movement that was able to bring down a dictator, as the title suggests. Otpor was created after a series of failed attempts in the Serbian student movement to bring down Milosevic, who was a brutal dictator. Milosevic had been in power in Serbia for many years, and the situation was pretty rough. Most of the country was unemployed. Students had had a major uprising and shut down universities for 6 months, but nothing had really changed. All that effort hadn't led to a victory, and the student leaders were feeling really hopeless and disappointed. And out of the kind of debriefing of this failure of the student union to overthrow Milosevic and bring forth a new vision for Serbia, they realized they needed to integrate structure into their mass protest organizing. And Otpor basically built a whole new organizing model, which included a really comprehensive mass training program. This mass training program was run all around the country, and thousands of leaders were generated. People would attend these week-long trainings after work every day to get orientated in the movement. And when the movement won, over 70,000 people were trained in the Otpor method of organizing. So now the movement absolutely had the power to escalate. They were able to do really big mass protests, and everyone was moving along on the same strategy. All the parts of the movement were strategically aligned, and they escalated over and over again. This led to major strikes all across the country. They shut down the capital, and folks from all across the country came in for this protest. And then eventually the police and the military refused to cooperate with the government, and ultimately the movement ousted Milosevic the dictator. Again, I'd really recommend our film Bringing Down the Dictator, as it talks all about this movement and how they were able to win, using the combination of mass protest, which is rich in student organizing, combined with the structure-based organizing that we see in the trade union movement and other established organizing spaces. That concludes the little update on the social movement ecology and the hybrid model of organizing. I highly recommend the Momentum website. If you've found this interesting, I highly recommend you check out the Momentum organizing website. There is lots of good theoretical information about this model and movements that have applied it there.